Good evening. I hope you're well. Thank you for attending the last of the series of sessions around research methodology and designs. The session that we have today is on mixed methods research. And we only really have one session for this because, as the name implies, mixed methods is really about the mixing of qualitative and quantitative methodologies, and you have already had those independently taught to you over the last 6 or 7 sessions that we've done. So this really just talks about the processes of amalgamating the two and the considerations thereof. My name is Professor Tennyson Mkuchini. You have probably met me now one too many times. I am the project leader for UNISA's online postgraduate support program, which, as you all know, is here to kind of make sure that we really develop your research skills and all the other ancillary skills, such as your ability to write articles, to apply for grants, and so forth. But at this point, we are developing your understanding of the different methodologies. And please do remember that even though you've subscribed to one specific methodology, it is always important that you have a very sound understanding of all the other options, because you cannot really opt out of something that you don't understand, and do so in an informed or scholarly informed way. So that's the basis of why we are walking you through everything. As always, the basic rules to these sessions apply. We will be sending out the soft copy versions of the presentation in due course. You also will note that I will soon be minimizing, or actually turning off, my video so we can focus more explicitly on the presentation at hand, and it actually is a lot more helpful for you when it comes to downloading these things. So as we speak right now, I'm launching the mixed methods lecture. Typically, we have slides that I've included just so they can become aids to you when it's time to review this work in my absence. And yeah, and we'll see how that goes. So this is the final session on the options around the different methodologies. I'm just about to turn off my video, and please remember that these sessions that we've run asynchronously, like the non-live versions, we will be setting up standalone question and answer sessions, which you are most welcome to attend. So as you listen to this, please note any questions that you have, and then you can pose them when we have these live question and answer sessions that we've promised you. Right. I must remind you that this session is on selecting a methodology, and in particular, we're looking at issues related to mixed methods research. Now, by the end of this session, you can expect that you will have been exposed to a number of things. Firstly, we will of course define and explain to you what mixed methods research is about. We'll also then speak to or restate some of the weaknesses and strengths of the quantitative and qualitative research designs. Remember, those are the two component contributors to mixed methods research. And then, of course, look at the different modes and ways in which integration of qualitative and quantitative research can occur. Then we will look very quickly at some of the strengths and weaknesses of mixed methods research. And of course, finally, we will talk about some application issues as they relate to some of the challenges that feasibility and ethical challenges that exist when one considers mixed methods research. Now, of course, as you know, mixed methods research is about the mixing of qualitative and quantitative methods. And it is important that I just refresh those two and point out some key differentiating factors between the different methods and approaches. And of course, this can sort of make sure that you are well, you are ready for the conversation about true mixed methods research. Now, so if we think about quantitative approaches, they are generally objective or they prioritize objectivism. So the whole view that facts represent singular truths and that the truth is unchanged regardless of who the researcher is, regardless of who the participant is, and so forth. They rely on structured data. Fact issues such as generalizability and reliability are central to quantitative approaches. They are heavily reliant on statistical manipulation. And of course, we spoke about experimental, quasi-experimental, and non-experimental approaches within quantitative research. By contrast, qualitative approaches prioritizes subjective over the objective, and they are of the view that there are a number of truths that exist in relation to any one phenomena. They are reliant on unstructured data and work around themes and coding and narratives and that type of stuff. Of course, we spoke about some of the examples and traditions that included phenomenology, grounded theory, ethnography, case studies, historical research, and so forth. Typically, qualitative research is not about generalization, but they are much more narrowly focused on phenomena with the promise that they grant much more deeper explorations. And they are focused on the meanings that people associate with experiences that they've gone to, and of course the fact that the context that you're in is likely to bias what it is that you see. Of course, those are somewhat generic, rudimentary differentiations, but I think with the background of the sessions that you have had up to this point, it should be fairly straightforward for you to separate out quantitative from qualitative methods. So now when we talk about mixed methods research, it is important that we specify what it is, and more importantly, it is good that we stipulate what it is not, because ironically, there is quite a lot of serious misunderstanding around what mixed methods research is, and this misunderstanding you can come across in the most unexpected spaces with very senior scholars and so forth. But as a method, mixed methods research focuses on collecting, analyzing, and mixing both quantitative and qualitative data in a single study. So the idea with this is that something is mixed methods only if there is some type of mixing of quantitative and qualitative data in a single study. If you have two studies and one is quantitative and another is qualitative, and they relate to the same topic, but they were not the same study, you can't call that mixed methods. If you have a study where there's two approaches that are quantitative, you can't say because there's mixing approaches, that's a mixed method study. The mix must always be a quantitative and a qualitative mix. So you will notice that when we talk about what you should be aware of, you should be aware that mixed methods is not just a triangulation of data collection methods where all of the methods are quantitative or all of the methods are qualitative. It is a mixture of partial qualitative, partial quantitative. Now, there are a number of key elements that you would expect to see when one talks about mixed methods research. So these are the characteristics that embody what mixed methods research is. Firstly, in terms of the bigger picture, in terms of the philosophical stance of mixed methods research, it is premised on the view that the world that we're in is so complex that really, when one wants to study and understand key phenomena within it, you have to be a pragmatist. And a pragmatist is really someone who's practical, who's functional, so you use the tool that fits the occasion and that you don't subscribe to any one single tool. So basically what that means is that the appreciation that if one has a research question that looks like it lends itself in some shape to qualitative methodologies, and in another shape it lends itself to quantitative methodologies, then the researcher should feel enabled to be partially qualitative and to be partially quantitative. And that's what this whole thing about being practical is. Of course, quantitative research is very positivist. So in this philosophical stance that we're talking about, the continuum that we're talking about is the positivist approaches for quantitative research, pragmatism for the mix of quanti and quali, and then of course qualitative is constructivist. And that's basically the different philosophical stances that exist. Now, in mixed methods research, the agenda or the priority is really about the mixing of both quantitative and qualitative aspects in all spaces of, in all areas of the research journey. So there would be a mixture in terms of the way the objectives are written out, that some are qualitative, some are quantitative. There will be a mixture in relation of the data collection approaches, mixture in terms of the data analysis components, mixture in terms of the interpretation components that exist. And really, most people would say, why mix and complicate your life? Why mix and complicate your life when you have these very clear standing out paradigms that are quantitative and qualitative? Why mix? Where is the benefit? And the benefit is the ability to be able to gain richer, to actually maximize the benefits of what quantitative research brings to you, along with what qualitative research brings to you. So mixed methods afford you that ability to benefit from all the advantages of either approach that you're using, and to minimize the disadvantages that are brought by those approaches. Of course, mixed methods, that whole ability to see things from different contexts is a great benefit. The ability to take the strengths of qualitative research, the strengths of quantitative research, and to kind of bring them to bear on a single study. They are all great, but of course, it comes with challenges. And some of the challenges of mixed method research are that it can be very resource intensive. The costs are very high because you are almost doubling up on everything that you do. Of course, trying to have a single study where part of the philosophical stance is quantitative and another part is qualitative means that there is a potential that somewhere in the journey, the purity of each of the philosophical stances will get swallowed by the other. And that purity will be swallowed either in terms of how people understand and process the problem they're looking at. There are problems in synthesizing the qualitative and the quantitative bits. And of course, because it is complicated by this integration expectation, there is a likelihood that people who are not very well experienced researchers find that they struggle with having meaningful integration. So, of course, I've already alluded to some of the times when mixed methods research is appropriate, and for purposes of clarity, I've collated them into a single slide. And the first thing about mixed methods research is that there are problems that are by their very nature so complex that it is clear that the research problem cannot be adequately addressed qualitatively or quantitatively alone, and they need a mixture of these two different worlds to be able to get a meaningful understanding. So beyond the research problem justifying it, we have to be aware that the researcher is competent in both these areas. So I always hear a lot of people talk about mixed methods research as if it is a way of diluting qualitative and quantitative research. In actual fact, it is the exact opposite. It is to do with if you think that you know quantitative research poses its own problems, qualitative research poses its own problems and skills requirements. Mixed methods research requires that both the skills that you have in qualitative research and the skills you have in quantitative research must be singularly applied. But in addition to that, you have to have the skill of integration at different levels and the skill of actually being able to integrate but still maintain the purity of the qualitative aspects, the purity of the quantitative aspects. So the skill requirement from mixed methods research is very, very high compared to people who do single method studies. Of course, the next thing is that it, as I've mentioned, is very resource intensive, and the resource extends beyond financial resources to resources in terms of time, in terms of expertise. And then, of course, you will all know that many of the worlds that we work in have audiences that have been socialized in a particular way. So if you look at the hard sciences, you'll find that the audiences within hard sciences have been conditioned to respect and respond to quantitative research methodologies. And by contrast, the audiences in some of the arts have been conditioned to work more with the qualitative research methodologies. So when you do mixed methods research, you have to present it in such a way that it resonates with these essentially very different type of populations. And that in itself is difficult. So the dissemination of mixed methods research is quite complex by comparison to everything else. Now I've put a slide in front of you, which I've left for a couple of seconds to just try and get you to read it. And really what I want to do, and this is where the rest of the session essentially focuses on these dimensions of mixed methods design that I'm sharing with you. So firstly, when people talk about mixed methods designs, the first question that people are saying are, look, so what is it when you're talking about mixed methods? What are the components of mixing that we need to be aware of? And this is where this slide is a beautiful summation of the things that you should concern yourself with. And literally, really, in many respects, understanding mixed method research starts and could end on this very slide here, because once we have figured out this slide, everything else requires deciphering rather than new understanding. So when we talk about mixed methods research, we're talking about the mixing of quantitative and qualitative approaches. But when we describe that, the first thing we must describe is the timing of the mixing. So are things mixed at the same time, or are they sequentially mixed? And what I mean in simple terms is if it's concurrent, which means the same time, it means that you have a study where you have qualitative and quantitative things, but both the data collection for the qualitative and the data collection for the quantitative have happened at the same time. That is concurrent mixed methods. And of course, there are some mixed methods where the researcher will begin with the qualitative phase, followed by a quantitative phase. That is a sequence. So that sequential nature makes it then a sequential mixed method study. So we now know that we can differentiate things by whether we have a concurrently timed study or a sequentially timed study. Then the next thing, that's a consideration, and often this one people don't talk about, but they take account of in any case. You have to take account of the weighting of each of the different paradigms. So is the study of equal weight, that the quantitative and the qualitative aspects are generally about the same weight within the study? And if not, are they does one overpower the other, or are they unequal weight? Then the next thing that you look at when you talk about mixed method research relates to the actual way in which this mixing occurs. You may mix data by merging it together, as in you take the qualitative and you take the quantitative and you put them together, and that merging is more likely to happen when it's a concurrent study, because you're merging things that are happening at the same time. So when they happen, they are literally together and they are merged together. Then the other option of mixing is through embedment, where when you are embedding things, you may actually have a study that is largely quantitative, and in it you embed a smaller low-level weight of qualitative, or vice versa. You have a highly quantitative study in which you embed qualitative data. So we've spoken about the merging of data, we've spoken about the embedding of data, then we talk about the connecting the connecting of data, and that really relates to having, say, qualitative data, but communicating it in a quantitative way, in a way that connects it to the other paradigm. So those are the three different types of mixing that are possible within the different mix methods options. Now, the next 10 or so slides really look at the different designs that exist, and I expect that you will find that these will not be memorable to you at this point, but that is absolutely okay. And what I've done with each slide here is I have put in what the particular design version is used for. I've spoken about the different procedures that I used to name the particular design example. Then I share some of the strengths, some of the weaknesses. Then I also talk about the variants that exist. So I will do the first slide on the triangulation design methodically so you can see how it works. And then the other slides that come after that will be able to run through them much more quicker. So, and of course, with each of them, with each of these methods, I have a way, I've offered a schematic or diagrammatic representation of the design that I'm talking about. So the triangulation design, which is probably the simplest and most common version of mixed methods design, is when people literally take mixed methods. They take quantitative methods, qualitative methods, start them at the same time, and explore different elements of a study in the hope that the quantitative bits will give more insights into the qualitative and vice versa. So really, they are using complementary data from the different paradigms on the same topic at the same time. And it's generally referred to as a simple concurrent design. Of course, in this, you would have separate qualitative and separate quantitative data brought together within the same time frame, and that is where the concurrent nature of it. At this point, we're describing this description I've presented to you suggests that both the qualitative and quantitative are of equal priority, and that the data sets from each are merged at the point of analysis or at the point of interpretation. So they come in separately. You do what you do to explore what you need to explore. Then when it's time to analyze, you analyze them together. But all this happens at the same time. Of course, the strength of this is that normally it aligns to a much more naturalistic appearance in which problems present themselves, that the concurrent presentation is how the natural phenomena tends to appear. It's often easier to comprehend it this way. Of course, it allows for a much more efficient data collection process because you can maximally do both the quantity and qualitative at the same time. Of course, that requires, one of the challenges is that it requires clarity about how you separate the variants that exist. Then, of course, there may be a dilemma that's represented in terms of how you give effort to one methodology over the other. Schematically, how it would happen, if you look at the diagram at the bottom, you have a qualitative data collection process on your left-hand side and a quantitative data collection process on your right-hand side of that picture. Both of them contribute to the results. Then, of course, you analyze those results and you draw out interpretations. On that diagram that you have, that schematic representation, they are both occurring at the same time. And the first triangulation design is this concurrent, simple concurrent design. Now, remember the next type of triangulation that may happen would also be a type of concurrent design, but it's a concurrent design now where the results converge, and they call this the convergence model. So if you look at this, you'll notice that the data collection of both the quantity and the qualitative processes occurs at the same time. So too is vaguely the analysis. So too are the results. And at this point, both are still independent of each other. And then after the results have been brought out, one brings them together in a convergence where you compare and contrast the findings from the qualitative from the findings of the quantitative. This convergence model is different from the triangulation design that I showed earlier, the simple concurrent design where both the results were thrown together, were thrown into the same pot and reviewed as such. But here the convergence model, convergence variant specifically identifies how these somewhat very different result forms are brought together to compare and contrast. And then, of course, when you're comparing and contrasting them, you specifically reflect them as quantitative and qualitative results. Of course, the weaknesses that are inherent in this, and I've articulated some of them, and these are to do with the fact that somehow the convergence model depicts quantitative and qualitative data collection processes as if they are all equal, either in the sample sizes, in the length of time placed on each other, and so forth. And of course, when they are reflected that way, it gives an impression that their convergence is likely to be much more natural than one would expect. But in reality, the quant and the qualitative data collection processes generally are dealing with quite different volumes, sophistication of data, and as such, the comparing them at the point of convergence is a much more difficult and challenging process than one would believe. Now, another variant of triangulation, of the triangulation design, is this, that which they call the data transformation model. Basically, here, the quantitative and qualitative data collection occur at the same time, but in a transformation model, one of the variants, one of the paradigms gets converted into another, so that at the end there's much more leaning towards one type of paradigm over the other. So in this schematic representation, the data transformation model that I share with you is one where there's collection of data, quantitative data, collection of qualitative data, then actually the qualitative data is not only analyzed qualitatively, but in the analysis, the researcher will seek out ways of analyzing it so that they can quantitatively represent what they've seen in a way that allows for this qualitative data to be brought to the point of convergence in a way where the qualitative data is now also a quantitative data set. So you end up with two quantitative data sets that you are comparing and interrelating. And then, of course, you do that interpretation on your quantitative and qualitative data. But remember, the qualitative data would have been transformed so that it is more quantitative. Of course, this data transformation model can occur in different ways. It can occur where the quantitative data is transformed into quali, and it can also occur where the qualitative data is transformed into quantitative data. So far, all these designs that we're looking at are all part of the concurrent triangulation designs that I spoke of. They are just variants in how so the timing is the same. They are all concurrent, but what changes here is the nature of the mixing and the weight that is attributed to each. Remember, we're talking about the timing, the mixing, and the weight as being key ways that differentiate and describe the different mixed methods designs that exist. So validating quantitative data model starts with both quanti and qualitative data collection, and then qualitative analysis and quantitative analysis occur together. Then what then happens is the results, the quantitative results and the qualitative results are brought together, but you use the qualitative results specifically as a way of validating the quantitative data, sorry. So in actual fact, what is occurring is that you would have two sources, qualitative, quantitative design data collected at the same time pretty much, but when it comes to how you speak and refer to them and talk about them, you are actually using the qualitative results to bolster the quantitative observations that have been made. So there's a specific role that is played by the other. And of course, this is actually a very good choice to use if, say, you belong to a quantitative discipline and you ultimately want your work to have a higher weight of quantitative research or quantitatively expressed findings and interpretations, but you believe that the qualitative data would bring more richness to it. Right, okay. So now, then there's another concurrent method which is expressed differently, and this means that there is multi-level. The multi-level model basically means that people do things at the same time for the quantity and the qualitative data collection processes, but these procedures are done separately. So each of the quanti and the quali have their separate data collection and analysis, which is seen to be at different levels of the phenomena that is being looked at. And then at the very end, the overall interpretation brings all these things together. Now, so all along we were talking about the concurrent methods in which distinct or equal weight quantitative and equal weight qualitative representation exists. But what the next type of mixed method research relates to the different variants that are associated with the embedded design. And remember now, an embedded design is where literally you are taking either qualitative methodologies and embedding them into quantitative methodologies, or vice versa. And by implication, you can't to embed something into the other. That which is embedded has to be smaller than the thing that it is being embedded onto. So it's like if I said I was going to plant something in a garden, one would have to assume that the garden must be bigger than the plant. So similarly with embedment, when you're embedding something into a particular paradigm, then it should be understood that in most cases, the thing that you embed has to be smaller than the thing that you are embedding it into. And the real reason that people would embed something is that they may have understood that there's a particular paradigm that is the best fit for what they're looking for, but they then realize that on its own, it can't quite complete the range of things that need to be understood. And for that reason, you need to embed a touch of the other methodology or design to be able to fully understand the phenomena you want. So essentially, if say you have an area that you believe, or a research problem that has 5 objectives, and of those 5 objectives, 4 of them really look quantitative, but you need to achieve this one other for you to be able to get a full picture, you may go for an embedded design in which the quantitative design will be the majority, and then you'll embed qualitative into it, or vice versa, where the qualitative is the major design or methodology, but you embed the other, or in this case quantitative, into it. Now, there are different variants of the embedded design, and I'm not sure that I need to spend as much time on them all, but I will name them so that you can just understand what is going on. And remember, each of these embedding or different variants of mixed method research, they really just manipulate the nature of, or timing, the concurrent versus sequential timing. They play around with the mixing options that are available, from embedding, from extending, and so forth. Then they also, of course, play around with the issue of weighting, whether the study relies on a heavier weighted qualitative element versus a lighter weighted qualitative element, and so forth. So this embedded experimental model, which is also a variant of the embedded design, basically talks about the fact that you are embedding an experimental part into a bigger study. And there are a number of clues on how you can decipher this. So if you appreciate that mixed methods research is always about qualitative and quantitative research, then you can understand that when someone talks about embedded experimental design, they are saying that actually we are going to embed an experimental process into a bigger study. We know that an experimental process is quantitative by virtue of it being experimental, as was described when I described the quantitative methods. Then we must know that if the experiment that is being embedded is quantitative, the actual bigger study into which you are embedding the experimental bit must therefore be qualitative. So if you look at the schematic for this, you will notice that there is a bigger box that suggests that the bigger study is qualitative, but in it, you have embedded a experimental process in which people do quantitative measures, they do their interventions, they do a post measure of what's happened, but all of that is interjected by qualitative processes wherever possible. So there will be a qualitative process before the actual experimental phase. There will be a quantitative phase during the intervention, if possible, the experimental intervention. There will be a qualitative phase after. And then, of course, the interpretation will be based on the combination of these things. But the description here is that it allowed you to embed a different methodology to another one. And of course, the challenges with this is that the timing of embedment can change everything. There's a lot of potential bias in terms of how and when you time things, but essentially the strength of this is that if you recognize that one particular process, if followed alone without the contribution of another, can be limited. So if you recognize that studying something from start to end in quantitative ways without applying yourself qualitatively could have limitations, then this variant of the embedded design is a perfect one for you. The correlational model is another version of an embedded design, but in this, the embedment is really to do with someone. Remember, correlational model is the same. It's a non-experimental version of the experiment. So essentially, it is the same as the experimental embedded model, but here you are not embedding an experiment, an experimental process. You are embedding a process for understanding a correlation. So the bigger part will be the qualitative process that's there, but within it, there's a process for doing a correlation analysis. So, and of course, this is literally the experimental model that was presented on the last slide. But if you were to do that with something that's not an experiment, but is instead a correlation. Okay, so far, many of the initial designs we spoke about were to do with firstly, we spoke about concurrent and sequential, and we had concurrent things. Then we spoke about the different type of embedment or options that exist. Now we talk about the studies where actually this is non-sequential. It's non-concurrent, so it's in actual fact it's sequential, and we call these sequential designs can exist in very particular ways. One example of this is the explanatory design, and the explanatory design is basically where a study has two phases, which is the initial one is the quantitative one. Then you do a qualitative exploration or investigation with the expectation that that qualitative process will give you the ability to explain what was going on with the quantitative. So when you think about something being an explanatory design, the qualitative part of it comes after the quantitative bit, and it allows then for an explanation of what was going on in the quantitative phase. The strengths and weaknesses are specified on there, and I will leave those up for a second or two just so you can get an opportunity to read up on them. Now, the next are variants. There are variants of the explanatory design, and there are quite a number of variants. And I may not get into all of them because I think they are really a very specialized variants, but they explain the same thing. The fact that the first element is always quantitative. So you will see this follow-up explanations model. It's a variant of the explanatory design. The first few things that occur, the data collection, the analysis, and the results are all quantitative, followed by a process of injecting the qualitative so you can explain what is going on with the quantitative elements. Now, the participant selection model is similarly it's a quantitative. It's explanatory means that it's the first deliberate activities are quantitative, followed by the qualitative element. So here, where the participant selection element stands out, relates to the fact that you will use your initial quantitative inquiry to help you finesse your identification of those people that you want to be part of a qualitative study. So you may do a quantitative study with 150 participants, 2,000 participants, but you use the findings of it to tell you the categories and attributes of people from whom you would like to hear more on this topic, and then you can subject those to a qualitative process. But this variant of the explanatory design helps you in terms of identifying those very specific participants who would be good for a qualitative phase that will help to define or to explain what is going on. So after the explanatory models, there's what they call the exploratory design. And the exploratory design is another sequential design. And sometimes they refer to it as the exploratory sequential design. The previous one we spoke about was the explanatory sequential design. So the exploratory sequential design is basically where the first step of your study is qualitative, and then of course you then take the qualitative discoveries and you apply quantitative processes to explore much more clearly what it is that is going on. And in an exploratory design, generally what is happening is that there is a much more dominant qualitative phase that's added on or further explored by applying quantitative processes on top of it. Now, right, so in this exploratory design, there are configurations that people can add to sharpen up a particular element of the exploratory design so it can assist them with something. So some people may decide that, look, I actually want to develop an instrument for the second phase of the study, a data collection instrument that will help me with my second phase of the study. So you start off with qualitative data and you collect it, and at the end of that collection, you then use the results of your qualitative journey to help you to develop an instrument that will now be used to assist you with quantitative data collection. So ultimately, it is someone who is interested in a quantitative outcome, but they recognize that for them to reach that space where they can engage with things quantitatively, they must use qualitative data initially and then build that qualitative data so that they can identify items for the instrument that they're interested in. I have put this out a little bit for you so you can have a look at some of the descriptions that are given for the procedures and some of the challenges. So I'll give you 30 seconds or so to review this. Now, much like I spoke of the instrument development variant of an exploratory design, people have come up with other options that allow the same process to be used for determining other things. So, for example, you can use the same process to help you to develop a taxonomy. So, a taxonomy will help you, is basically a way that will allow you to develop a range of categories and relationships. If you remember taxonomies as you've come across them, as you talk about Bloom's taxonomy, all of them are really pictorial or representations of categories and relationships that exist between things. So in a taxonomy development model, one would use the exploratory design to develop a taxonomy. So you do qualitative data collection processes, and then you utilize those to help you to develop an understanding of the different relationships that exists, or even a theory that you can then now test through quantitative methodologies. Now, I've shown you, I've run through some of the exploratory, some of the designs that exist in relation to mixed methods research, but essentially, as you have noticed, the key defining things were to do with the timing and the concurrent versus sequential timing. There was to do with the weight in terms of whether one methodology overpowers the other. Then there were a range of manipulations that relate to the nature in which things are mixed in, are they embedded, and so forth. So now, of course, with mixed methods research, there are a number of ethical issues that are worthy of note, and those all relate to the fact, to things such as the fact that you may end up with much more information than would normally be possible with one design. And if that is indeed the case, then it means the requirements for compliance with confidentiality and other things becomes that much more important. Of course, the studies themselves are much more difficult to explain, so the dissemination issues are much more difficult. And similarly, when you are explaining these studies to potential participants, they are much more likely to have discrepancies in the way that participants comprehend what it is you're asking them to take part in, and so forth. Of course, issues around the management of consent forms means they are much more complex and detailed. So really, there are greater chances of people being asked to take part in things they don't understand. And then, of course, there's a lot of things, considerations that generally mean that there are higher requirements for safeguarding and protection of participants. And of course, there is the worry that sometimes even the researcher themselves has limited understanding of what it is that they are doing. And for that reason, they find it much more difficult to explain. And what I have now done really is offered a structure for a mixed methods research proposal. These are things that we have already covered in other contexts, but the structure is about the same. Really, where things change when you speak about the philosophical and theoretical foundations of your study. And of course, when you speak about methodologies, you will have reference to both qualitative and quantitative methodologies. And with each of these, remember that the qualitative phase may require you to have qualitative activities, such as the sampling should be qualitative, and the quantitative bits will have activities that are quantitative, and as such, things like the sampling will also be quantitative. And for that reason, you will find that mixed method studies have a wide range of data that they include in their overview around the methods. And then, of course, the literature review will have aspects that are much more based around quantitative ways of reviewing literature, and along with that, you will identify qualitative methodologies and so forth. I think many of these hints that I've shared with you are just there for the purposes of you having the ability to read them should you need. But at this point, I will leave them up there as a source for you to read. And of course, you can pause this video and be able to get a much more in-depth, a much more detailed space of time for you to consider these things. And now I've copied you into some reading and resources that are essential when one enters the world of mixed methods research. But do remember that a mixed method research assumes that you have very sound knowledge of both qualitative and quantitative methodologies as they stand on their own. So by the time you actually familiarize yourself with mixed methods research, you need to be very au fait and have a sound working knowledge of quantitative methodologies in their own right and qualitative methodologies in their own right. I'd like to thank you for taking time to listen to this presentation on mixed methods research. We're going to be offering a range of Q&A sessions, but once again, I share all these with a very stern warning. about the fact that they really give initial introductory insights, some intermediary knowledge about things, and occasionally we touch on some advanced principles. I think here some of the different variants of the designs were really at the high end of one's understanding about mixed methods research. But that said, there's much more to be learned, and I hope that you will take time to pursue this. You will take time to pursue this individually if you're someone doing mixed methods research. I thank you for your attention and hope that you have found this helpful. This is Professor Tennyson Mkuchini. Good night. Thank you.